Hello and welcome to the Business of Sports conversation. Obviously, there's an array of different types of jobs in the world of sports, the business of sports. And our topic here today is podcasting, sports podcasting in particular, with Andy Bernstein and the host and I would say creator
Mhm.
of the Legends of Sports broadcast, the Legend of Sports broadcast. And Andy, we appreciate you taking time. Um, as you look back on an industry that's relatively new, on something that's ever evolving. The word podcast, the first time you heard the word podcast, Legends of Sport had not been created yet. You decided to create it. What are your early recollections of this medium?
Well, Jeff, great to see you, my friend, as always. So it's kind of a little bit of a roundabout answer because I started to do a show on the Lakers Time Warner channel. As you remember, the Lakers signed that huge exclusive deal with Time Warner. And I was thinking to myself, well, where is all this content going to come from for a 24-hour, 365-day Laker channel? So I proposed a show called Through the Lens, and first to the Lakers, and then they referred me to Time Warner, and that show took off. It was I was sitting on a set with a Laker personality, could be James Worthy or Jeannie Buss or Gary Beatty or Phil Jackson, and we talked about their career through my photos because obviously I was there in the room with them, for their entire careers. I mean, Jeannie and I started at the same time. Um, so the show was going along really well, and I was at a Laker game for baseline is getting ready for a game one night, and the great Norm Pattis, the late great Norm Pattis, dear friend of mine, who you knew as well, courtside season ticket holder for 40 years, calls me over, and he had the rolled up program as he always had, and he calls me over, and Norm talked at 100 miles an hour. Says, Andy, I love what you're doing on this Laker show, and you're having these great conversations, and I want to get it on my podcast network. And I had heard the word podcast, it just out there in the world, but I didn't know what it was. So I said, Norm, I love you, man, but with all due respect, I don't know what a podcast is. What is it? And he said, Andy, it's just like radio, but but you're talking to people, long conversations. And then I said, Norm, thank you so much. It's such a wonderful offer, but it's a visual show, Norm. I'm showing photos, and he literally said to me, Jeff, he said, Andy, nobody gives a what about the photos. They want to see the photos. They'll go to your website. They'll go to NBA.com. Nobody cares. They care about the stories. They care about your relationships with all the people you're talking to, and the fact that you were in the room when all that happened. And so it was an eye-opening experience. I went to Norm's office the next day at Podcast One. We hammered out a very short, sweet agreement. The next thing I knew, I'm going to Podcast One every Thursday afternoon to record a podcast interview. The guests would call in, and I would interview them, and sometimes a guest would come to the studio, like Peter Guber, the great Peter Guber came to the studio, which was wonderful. 4 or 5 guests came, and we had a great home there for a couple of years, and then we decided to move the podcast over to the LA Times platform, which wasn't the great timing, the best timing because it was right before COVID and then during COVID. And then we've been happy at iHeart ever since. We've been in iHeart now for this is our 8th season of the podcast. I think we've been at iHeart now for 5 seasons, and 8 seasons altogether. Finishing up season 8, over 200 interviews across the spectrum of sports, so to speak. And you helped me. Remember, you helped me get Luke Robitaille. Um, you helped me with who else? You had Darrell Evans from the Kings. So I love the relationships I've forged over the years, which has helped me book some great guests and have great conversations. So that's what the podcast is all about.
So taking a step back here, at the beginning here, as I was introducing you, I did not go over your many accomplishments, but for the students who are tuning in here, let's take a step back and explain your role as a photographer. So,
Mhm.
in the moment, you're at a Lakers game. You are the staff photographer for the Lakers. You're the NBA photographer based in Los Angeles. It's a career you've had for decades, and we'll chat about photography in a separate conversation. But just paint a little bit of a picture in case people are confused when again you're saying you're in a Laker game and Norm called you over.
Right.
And again, also sort of thinking that yes, you're a storyteller, but you'd always been a storyteller through the camera and not necessarily, so to speak, through your voice.
Yeah, very true, Jeff. So my history is I became the NBA's first official photographer way back in 1986. I helped to co-found NBA Photos in 1986. So we're about to celebrate our 40th anniversary, which is kind of mind-blowing. I actually got my start in pro sports in LA with the LA Kings when I was a student at Art Center College of Design. That was probably 1979 when they were the only team, including college, who would allow me as a student to come in and shoot behind the scenes and practice. And I'm forever grateful to the Kings for that. Kings are still my client as a photographer, although I have retired as an active photographer. My company, Bernstein Associates, continues to be the official photographer for AEG's Crypto.com Arena, Peacock Theater, like I said, the LA Kings. I had a wonderful 43-year career as a senior photographer from the NBA. I was honored by the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame in 2018 as only the second photographer honored with the Gowdy Award, which is kind of one step below enshrinement because I never played the game. I just documented it with my camera. And I think at last count, and it's kind of hard to count, but I kind of average, I think I did about 5,000 NBA games or give or take 100 or two in my career. 40 straight NBA finals, 36 All-Stars, countless international events. It was a wonderful, wonderful career with the camera. Still had a little gas left in my tank at my age, so I decided to put the camera down and focus all of my bandwidth and energy and business attention on building legends of sport. First through the podcast, but then through during doing publishing. We just published a book, partnered with Vanessa Bryant, Kobe's widow, of all the Kobe and Gigi murals all over the world. The book is called Mamba and Mambacita Forever. Um, and we're looking to do some documentaries and all kinds of other stuff. So, students should stay tuned on that end about Legends of Sport. But the podcast has been sort of the plant the flag in the ground of a very, very saturated sports content landscape, of which we felt that we have a niche. Have sort of carved this out of talking about legendary athletes and moments and teams, even venues and personalities in sports that isn't really talked about on a consistent basis. I mean, you hear this talk about the GOAT, who's the greatest of all time in this sport and that sport, and could this team have beaten that team, and all about different eras. And we kind of get through that noise and really talk about the person, their journey, where they came from, who influenced them, what was a pivotal moment in their life and their career. Every single person from Magic to Kobe to Peter Guber to everyone I've talked to had that moment in their life. This kind of magical moment of truth. And I love kind of peeling that back and really finding out, what made that person tick from the beginning. So it's a lot of fun, and we got some really great stuff coming up now that we're way past COVID and we can get out there and do live events, which we've started to dip our foot into that. Um, and getting off the court, was a tough decision, but the transition has been pretty smooth for me. I must say, I talk to a lot of retired athletes where that transition isn't that easy. Um, but I'm still very active with the NBA. I still consult. I still mentor the younger photographers, and keep my hand in the game in that way.
A lot of photographers, talking mostly still photographers, it can certainly be considered artists.
Hmm.
A podcaster, an artist to a certain extent as well. No argument there.
Hmm.
Yet at the same time, the word artist some of the people I've dealt with over the years, they've struggled, running a business,
Hmm.
understanding the business end of it. So from using podcasting in particular, with your connections, with your background, you have the visuals covered, obviously, better than anyone.
Hmm.
You have connections when you're talking about, the many guests you've had.
Hmm.
But, if you sit there and do a podcast and record it with Magic Johnson and nobody sees it, what's the point of it? So bring me into a little on the business side, because obviously, you gotta have a name of the broadcast, you have a deal.
Hmm.
Now you've transitioned to a video as well, in addition to like the audio that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Um, you know, have you had to put on a new sort of business hat to go with the creative hat? And that's not something everyone can pull off.
Well, Jeff, I love that question because nobody's really asked me that question in many interviews I've done. Um, and the business aspect, it's been difficult, I have to say. I mean, I built my photography business myself without really any business background. I wasn't brought up in a household that really, valued business. You know, my dad was a doctor, but he never talked about business, the business of being a doctor. Um, I went to Art Center where I had one business class the entire time I was there. Um, and you can be the greatest photographer or the greatest artist or anybody in the world, but if you don't know how to run a business um, and sustain that and keep clients coming back year after year after year and know how to work with vendors and say and how to save a little bit of money to reinvest into the business, you're not going to last very long at all. And I try to drill that into the young photographers I talk to, say you have to take business classes or you have to at least, intern or assist photographers if that's where you want to go in life with your career, to find out how they actually exist and how they flourish and how they just stay above water. I worked for one of my teachers when I was at Art Center, and I was very lucky. He had a studio, a very busy and very successful studio. I saw how he ran every aspect of the business from the inside. So fast forward, 40 plus years, I decided to sort of put the photography business over here and start this podcast business, which is a business. And it's been an eye-opening experience, is all I could say. There's a gazillion podcasts out there. There's many, many sports-based podcasts. How do you stand out from the others? How do you get a sponsor to come to you as opposed to someone else? And I found out pretty quickly in the podcast game that it's all about the numbers, all about the numbers. When I started out as a young photographer, it was really all about my ability as a photographer and especially with teams, and could teams entrust their visual history and documentation to me or my group. And the business side had to come secondary. Nobody who ever hired me said, oh, tell me what your business is like. They wanted to know if I could solve the problem photographically, right? um, and then keep coming back. So we are learning on the go here. I have a skeleton crew. There's like really three of us, four of us sometimes, um, who are building this platform through social media, trying to build a consistent following. We're in conversations with a platform right now that looks very interesting to us, and I think we look interesting to them as enhancing what we're both doing by working together. So hopefully that'll come to fruition soon. And there's no secret sauce here. I mean, there's only a few podcasters I know who are making serious money doing this.
Mm.
Probably could name them on one hand. Um, who have millions of followers. We don't have millions of followers, but we have a core group of followers who follow our my podcast. They follow our social media because we know that it's basically the same group because the numbers don't really change from month to month. And It's been an like I said, eye-opening experience. It's been frustrating at times. I've had to sort of circle the wagons and go to somebody like Peter Guber or other people I know in the business and try to just pick their brain. I'm like, I was really good at doing that, but this is a
Yeah.
whole new ball game for me. It's like learning to, I'm a righty, learning to write with my left hand. I always shot photos with my left eye. It's like, okay, now I all of a sudden have to learn with my right eye, or driving on the other side of the street. It sounds kind of cliche, but it really is. It's a challenge, and I welcome. I've never shied away from a challenge. You know me a long time. I'm a Brooklyn guy. Somebody puts, a roadblock in my way, I'm going to learn how to either go right through it, go around it, go over it, find a way to succeed. So we've been very happy with the steady growth of Legends of Sport, but we're at a point now where it really has to jump to the next level, which means capital investment. It means getting onto a different platform probably that can feature us more. iHeart's been great, but we're a little fish in a gigantic, like not pond, but like an ocean. I mean, I don't know how many tens of thousands of podcasts are on there. So, but we've forged some great partnerships. We're essentially the official podcast of the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame because we're the only podcast they let in to Enshrinement Weekend to broadcast basically live, to record live interviews. And there's a couple of other venues that we work with that we have a consistent appearance at and presence. So, I enjoy the process. I enjoyed, even though it was painful at the time when, I was building my photography business. Um, as my mother used to say, couldn't scrape two nickels together, much less buy like a roll of film. This is a little bit different. I'm a little different point in my life. So I can be a lot more patient, I think, now than I was when I was younger. But yet, you know, I sort of run out of patience sometimes because there's not a lot of, I like to say I'm the back nine of life. You're a golfer, Um, back nine of life, the holes are a little bit shorter than maybe the front nine, but I'm enjoying it. And we're going to see this through as far as it'll go. And every day is an adventure for sure.
So you said, this is a business and industry dictated by numbers.
Hmm.
So, I think the obvious, and I'm someone who listens to some podcasts, but I wouldn't call myself a huge podcast enthusiast.
Hmm.
Are we talking, just is it downloads? Is it the average time someone spends on the
Hmm.
on a podcast? Is it a returning person versus a new person? It's kind of like the analytics of a professional sports team.
Right.
Is it an analytics along the lines for the podcast? Those are the right numbers? Am I missing any type of
No,
numbers?
I mean, it's all,
What's the big win?
sure, Jeff, it's all of the above. I mean, as a podcaster, you need somebody to find your podcast. So you have to be able to sort of market it. And we don't have big money to market our podcast or do advertising. So we rely solely on our social media, which we built our social media at Legends of Sport, our Instagram from zero to, I don't know what we're at, 55, 56,000, which is pretty good. Combined with my photography one, we have over 200,000 followers, which is wonderful. So we're continually, like multiple times a day, pumping the podcast with reels or just mentions or whatever it is. Um, so it's social media, and then it's also once you get the person onto your either audio or YouTube video platform, they need to actually click on it. They have to watch it or listen to it. Then you have to get them to like it, and then you have to get them to subscribe to it. And then, by the way, you got to get them to tell all their friends to do the same thing. Um, and that's a challenge, man, because people are going to do what they're going to do. And we find that our demographic, which is mostly male, basically early 40s, mid 40s till way past my age, they are not like our kids' generation. They're not. clicking the like and the subscribe and the download, they'll come, they'll watch, they'll listen, and then they'll move on to something else before they have to hit like or do a heart or whatever it is. So we're trying we're trying to sort of educate as we go. In my the outro at the end of every podcast, I keep saying, tell all your friends to subscribe. You subscribe being the key word, because again, it doesn't matter how great your content is if the numbers, all the things that you described earlier, when you go to an investor, all they want to see is numbers. They're not listening to the podcast. They really, honestly, don't really care about the A+ lists of guests that I've had for 8 years. They want to know, how many downloads do you have? How many subscribers do you have? How many clicks? How many returning people do you have? What's your demographic? Blah, 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 blah. And you have to be able to
Mm.
answer all those questions. And our
Um,
numbers are we have modest numbers. Before our for our demographic and age group, I'm happy. Our
yeah.
challenge right now, Jeff, as we speak, I had a long meeting today with somebody, is bridging into the younger generation with older content. Like most of the younger generation never saw Kobe play. They Michael Jordan is like Babe Ruth to these people. You know, I mean, they're all mystic characters. Unless I'm talking about like Steph Curry is like ancient to this generation. I mean, he's still playing, and LeBron is like looked at like a grandfather. I mean, there's guys in the NBA that weren't born when LeBron started playing. So the challenge is bridging into this younger generation with content that is a little bit more suitable for their dads or their grandpas. But yet we know that sports is a legacy in families. And like my dad talked to me growing up about the Brooklyn Dodgers. I was born the year the Brooklyn Dodgers moved in 58. I never saw the Brooklyn Dodgers play. I never went to Ebbets Field, but I learned about them. I heard about them. So we want to be basically, for lack of a better term, the one-stop shopping for everything legendary in sports. And
Yeah.
that's a bold goal, but you know what? It's got to start somewhere.
So I was going to ask you who are some of your favorite guests have been, but
Mm.
one of the phrases you just hit me is, I think when you said something like, "I've had A+ guests, but the sponsors want to know how many clicks I've
Yeah,
got." So let's just go to the A+ guests. Who
yeah.
are some of the names that come to mind that you've been very fortunate to have as an on-air guest?
Oh man, yeah, I've been so lucky, and most of these guests come from either from directly having a relationship with them, or having a relationship with their agent or PR director or something. But um, I mean, it's got to begin and end with Kobe. I mean, when Kobe and I did our Mamba Mentality book together in 2018, he was so gracious in the first season of the podcast to welcome me to his office, and we brought the show down there, and we had this phenomenal interview and conversation about the book, but also about our relationship and his journey. And Magic's been on a couple of times. He's great. He's just terrific. Um, I mean, I've had Pat Riley on. I've had Peter Guber, was unbelievable. I mean, the owner of the Dodgers and Warriors, and the most amazing story, rags to riches, Horatio Alger story like I had never heard in person. And it's such a wonderful guy. I mean, just great. I mean, I had Luke Robitaille on, who, I shot Luke when he was a rookie. He didn't even speak English. He couldn't even drive a car. Luke was amazing. Sue Bird was on during Hall of Fame enshrinement this past enshrinement weekend. She was just honored by the Hall of Fame with enshrinement. I shot. I go back to when Sue Bird was 11 years old. I shot her in the 11 and under AAU championships, and she was probably like not even 4'2". So it's wonderful to go and have these conversations with people I have such a history with. Um, Nancy Lieberman, like one of the greatest people of all time, but obviously a trailblazer in women's sports and basketball. Lisa Leslie was on. we have people around sports like George Lopez, a great super fan of the Lakers. I've had him on. I had Billy Crystal. I had Spike Lee. So every week, every interview is wonderful. I love the preparation, just like I love preparing for every single game, no matter what sport it was. It, there's always preparation involved. Um, whether it was a hockey game, basketball game, baseball game, football, didn't matter. It was preparation. Um, and I love that aspect of it, preparing the questions, working with my producer, and then the post production, working with my editor and finding the photos to insert in the video version. And the greatest thing that ever happened to us at Legends of Sport actually was COVID because we had been doing audio only until 2020. COVID hit. We're all stuck in our house. I was able to sneak out to my office, which is only a couple of miles away, and do Zoom interviews. Nobody had heard of Zoom before COVID. And every interview was on Zoom. In fact, Sue Bird was the first interview that we did on Zoom. Um, I believe it was March of 2020, and she was stuck in her house. And she said she didn't even have a hoop like in her driveway. She was just
Mm.
stuck in her house in Connecticut. And I was here. And so every interview on Zoom has been fun. It's easy for the guests, they just hit a button and they're in. And so anyway, I could go on and on, but every week, I have a board over here that's got probably 50 names on it of prospective guests, and my producer and I just look at it and say, okay, who are we going to call again? Who are we going to follow up with? And that's part of it's challenging. It's a little frustrating sometimes, but most of the time we're able to schedule people that are on our wish list. And just before the call with you, I reached out to Flea. Flea, the great Lakers, of course, Red Hot Chili Pepper bassist, but huge super fan of the Lakers, has offered to come on the podcast, and like, let's do it, man. Let's find a date. So that's fun, and more to come. I mean, we still have season 8 to finish, and we're already planning for season 9, which starts. Season 9 really will start during NBA Summer League, where we take the podcast to Las Vegas. We do a bunch of interviews there. Then we go to Hall of Fame in August. Every Hall of Fame weekend, we do about 25 different individual interviews, which is fantastic. And then we start releasing those right after Labor Day. That Tuesday, right after Labor Day, is when we launch the new season. So, um, yeah, I mean, I don't even know who's on the docket for next week. I have to check who I'm interviewing next week, but it's super fun, man. We just did two events um, adjacent to NBA All Star Weekend, which were super fun. One is out now, which was Sports Business Classroom, which was fantastic. I did three great interviews there. Then a Faith Connection and Sport event, which was a really amazing event. We're releasing that next week, so folks should tune into that. I know that your this interview will have a long life, but hopefully people will have tuned in and listened to all those, and then whatever else we're going to release.
Let's use somebody like Flea as an example.
Mhm.
I don't know if Sue Bird's active on social media, but for the sake of this conversation, let's assume she is. I know Magic Johnson's active on
Mhm.
Twitter.
Yeah,
Like, so you get someone like Flea, you get like Magic or Sue, they do a Zoom, they come in person, you go to them, whatever it is, and that's great. But is it a matter of like then asking for a few more things like, hey Sue, this podcast is going to drop in a week. Will
hmm
you tweet out the link? Hey Flea, you have a the Red Hot Chili Peppers, has a huge following on
yeah,
Instagram.
yeah,
Would you would you share it? It's kind of like the creative part ends, the editorial part, the content part ends, but
hmm
then do you kind of have to shift and put your business hat on? Because again,
yeah,
you can only reach so many people in your silo here
yeah,
and now, but the only way you're going to keep adding to those numbers is to what? Ask the folks then to share it, which then can also be a little weird because it's like, hey, look at me, everyone, I'm so popular. I just get interviewed and watch it,
yeah.
because I'm so famous. It's
Well, You know what, Jeff? That's the way things are now, and our guest social media following is a factor. It's not the factor or the number one factor. I mean, I I left out Jerry West when you asked me that question about my favorite interviews ever. Jerry had to be probably the second favorite interview. Jerry didn't have social media. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like, but what am I not going to interview Jerry West if he's willing to? So, you know, it's interesting because Jerry talked a lot about the mental health struggles that he had, which he had highlighted in his 2011, I think, book that he put out, which was totally like the media just never paid attention to that at the time. And of course, Michael Phelps and Simone Biles and DeMar DeRozan and all the athletes that have come out within recent years have have sort of raised the awareness for mental health in sports, which is wonderful. But we're talking about the logo here, Jerry West, and he was willing to talk about anything and everything. So, I'm hoping, like, for example, Jerry's talking about mental health. I sent that interview to Kevin Love, who was also on the podcast, who's also a huge advocate for mental health. I said, Kevin, I want you to hear this,
Yeah.
and I think he might have he might
Shared
have
it.
tweeted it out or shared it or whatever. Um, I'm hoping to get Michael Phelps on, because his story is amazing. But we're not shy about asking. Now we're asking for a shout out from every guest. Before I start the interview. I say, would you mind just saying really quickly, hey, I'm Sue Bird and happy to be on the Legends of Sport podcast. Boom, finished. And then we get a lot of mileage out of that to preview her episode. And then we always, if they have social media, Instagram, we always collab with that person. And, somebody like Sue Bird, she has somebody handling her social media. So we have to find out who that person is, make sure they're aware of it. Um, I just had Congressman Eric Swalwell on a couple of months ago, who I'm a huge fan of. He's running for governor of California. Huge sports fan. I always have to
Hmm.
find a sports angle, obviously.
Yeah.
Um, and grew up in the Bay Area, huge Niners and Giants fan, and the whole. And he wouldn't even. I didn't even want to go to politics. We didn't even talk politics. We would talk about his history with sports and all of that. But Eric's got a huge social media following, and he collabed with the Real, and he reshared it and the whole thing. So I don't know what kind of bump we got from that, but it was fabulous.
Last couple questions. Look, not everyone's Jerry West or, Kobe Bryant when it comes to A+ interviews,
Yeah,
but also some of the best conversations can be with, the backup goalie or,
yeah.
that NBA player who, had a cup of coffee and whatnot. Any guests come to mind that have been your favorites, whether they just it was their personality, the stories they told,
Mm-hmm.
or their uh, they just kind of surprise you, saying, "Yeah, I'll put them. Let's have them as a guest," and then you're kind
Yeah.
of like, "Oh wow, I didn't see that coming." And again, these might be a name or two that the average sports fans maybe don't even recognize.
Sure. What comes to mind first and foremost, Jeff, are writers. Not every writer is a household name. I mean, Mike Sealski, very well-known writer, he's Philadelphia Inquirer for years and years. But, Mike has a long history, great career, but people don't really know him. But he's written some amazing books. Wrote an incredible book about Kobe. So I had him um, on the podcast to talk about that. Then I went to Philadelphia and we did a panel discussion together, which was amazing. Then Mike wrote this great book about the history of the slam dunk, which
Hmm.
was just unbelievable. So to have a writer on is fantastic because the subject matter is so relevant and interesting. Um, and I read every single book of every writer that we have on, which is amazing. I just had the author of the Moses Malone biography, a recent, maybe 4 or 5 weeks ago, I had on a writer named Brian Riley. Nobody ever heard of Brian Riley. It's his first book he ever wrote. I know Brian from another life, from like the sports and imaging um, sort of syndication business. And all of a sudden, Brian sends me a book in the mail that he wrote. And I'm like, wait a minute, I didn't know you were an author. So the book is about the first year of the New York Rangers, the 1926-27 season. First year the Rangers came into existence. Brian wrote this amazing book where it's actually a novel, but he's using all the historical context of the early days of the NHL, the first season of the Rangers, real personalities, but he kind of made a story out of it that it's just so freaking interesting. And I had to have him on. I first of all, I would have read the book whether he's going to be a guest or not. But I loved the episode. I don't care honestly how many people tuned in or downloaded or anything. It was a fun conversation for me. And you know, my history with the Rangers goes back to when I was a kid. And to have Brian on was just such a wonderful experience. So anyway, every single guest is fantastic. I've had coaches on who people don't really know about or heard about. Um, I had the doctor on who was the medical expert for the NBA bubble. He was the one who
Hmm.
who kind of came up with all the health and safety protocols for the NBA bubble. Nobody knows who this guy is outside of his inner circle, but what a story about how that was created and how what a success it was. Oh, and by the way, I was there for 53 days and I experienced all of that and I got to know him there. So I love the fact that basically it's my show and I can have whoever I want on. And
Right.
if I find the book or the subject or whatever it is interesting, I'm going to talk to that person. And I don't have somebody over my shoulder saying, "Well, they're not going to give us the numbers," and we're going. You know what? I don't want to hear that. This is fun for me, and I enjoy it.
As we wind down here, again, it is Legends of Sport. So the Legends of Sport leader, I'm sure, has a dream guest, the one who,
Ah,
ticks off a lot of personal, boxes of yourself, that makes sense for the podcast. You mentioned earlier a politician being on, but,
sure.
his love of sports being the driving force.
Yep.
I think in past conversations we've had, I know the name, but I'll ask you, who's that one guest that would be the home run, I guess, to use a sports term?
Well, I mean, I would obviously give anything to interview Michael Jordan. Michael doesn't really do any interviews, very, very few. Um, I've asked a couple of times, and I'll keep asking. They very politely say, thank you for asking, Andy, but Michael's going to decline. But I'll keep asking. The time will come at some point, I think. Michael Jordan.
And when you say you ask
Yeah.
for someone's, maybe looking to start their own podcast,
Hmm.
again, Michael Jordan's obviously a very
Yep.
unique type, but
Yep.
is it a publicist, is it an agent? How do you, I know you
Yeah.
have access to that type of information that the average person doesn't have, but
Sure.
just to dovetail real quick, what would be for a young podcaster, a young journalist watching this, what would be if you only reached out to one person on behalf of an athlete or celebrity,
Hmm.
who would that one person be by title, I guess?
Well, of all the layers of people associated with somebody like Michael Jordan,
Yeah,
I think if you can get to his publicist first and foremost, because the publicist, that's their job, right?
yeah.
And they get a gazillion requests and they filter it down to the two or three, that the person will do. Um, in Michael's case, I happen to know the woman who has been running his business since his playing days. I know her pretty well, and I have no qualms about emailing her, and I say, "Hey, it's me again," kind of thing. Um,
And
and once in a while, I'll hear from his office that, "Hey, Michael would love a print of this or that." Um,
yeah,
Probably my most well-known photo of Michael holding the trophy in '91 after the first championship, and with his dad next to him and all that. After his dad was tragically murdered, his office reached out and they asked me for a signed print of that, which is like the most unbelievable thing ever. Um, but to answer your question directly, Jeff, you gotta use whatever connections you have, right? And don't be afraid to ask somebody. Um, I mean, look, when you were at the Kings and I wanted to interview Luke, I asked you. I mean, or if I didn't know you, I know somebody who knew you, right? So you have to be able to go through those channels. And I'll give you another example. At the Dodgers, I worked for the Dodgers for a long time, from '84 to '95. That '88 championship team, I was their team photographer. But I didn't keep in touch with those guys. Like I didn't keep in touch with Oral Hershiser or Kirk Gibson, or even before that, my tenure there with guys like Ron Say. But Steve Brenner, who's been there, who Steve's been with the Dodgers, associated with them going back, I think, to the late '70s, and he's still with them. Um, still friends with Steve. So, like, I reach out to Steve. Hey, I see Ron Say released a new book. I don't know Ron Say. I said, do you think he would talk to me on my podcast? Or I see Oral Hershiser has got a new business venture, or at least I'm seeing him on TV all the time.
Yeah.
And or Kirk
Dancing.
Gibson, yeah, or they were celebrating whatever anniversary of Kirk Gibson's famous home run, And I had all Steve was able to get all three of them. And then recently, we haven't released the episode yet, but I wanted to talk to Stan Kasten because Stan and I actually go back to the beginning of my career. He was the president and GM of the Atlanta Hawks when he worked for Ted Turner. And at one time, Stan was the president and GM of three of the four professional teams in Atlanta, which was insane, right? And I see Stan, I'll go to a Dodger game, I'll say hi, or he comes to a Laker game and we chat for a minute, but I don't have a direct line to Stan. So I go through Steve, and
Yeah.
Steve, if he can do it, he'll do it. And he's actually bat 1,000 because every person I've asked for, he's been able to come through with. I'm not never going to abuse it. And it's always for a reason. I want to talk to Stan because of their back-to-back championships. We need a podcast to open the baseball season at the end of March. So Stan's a perfect person to talk to. Totally a legend of sport, and it was a wonderful conversation.
Yeah, and being in your shoes, you just want to get the offer in front of the person's eyes.
Right.
Whether they say yes or no, you can't control that, but at least if you know that the contact you're doing, the resource that you've reached out to
Yeah.
is presenting that to them,
Sure.
and it might be able to sway it a little in
Yeah.
favor because again, with your type of podcast, you're not asking anything controversial or
No.
whatnot. It's a
No.
good positive conversation and
Yeah.
often they'll sway into that and help with the process.
Yeah.
Last two questions.
Yeah.
Would it be ideal for you to have your show on television on a regular basis? If you're able to take this show, your podcast, and sell it to, I'm just making it up, the FanDuel Sports Network, and on Saturdays from 3 to 3:30, it airs in every market that FanDuel Sports has. I mean,
Yeah.
is that how it would be kind of the a big goal?
100%. That is our goal right now. There's this thing I just learned about called fast channels. I don't know. Do you know what a fast channel? I didn't know. I think I've known it for a week. Apparently, there are these channels that if you have like a Samsung TV, for example, there's channels that are only broadcast on Samsung TV, um, or other brands of TVs, or I don't even know. But that's a niche that we might be able to carve into. Like I said, there's a platform we're talking to that's about to launch a consumer network, let's just say, that we would be perfect on. Um, and I think of Graham Bensinger, who has a syndicated show, and he sits down with all kinds of celebrities in the world of sports, and that's been his model. I mean, he never did a podcast, but his show is syndicated, and he gets A++ guests, and I don't know how he does it, but that's he's kind of my role model. I love the way he interviews people. He's got this sort of kind of loosey goosey style, very friendly. I try to be the same way. Um, And I love watching other people interview people because I learn from every single person, whether it's somebody on the news doing a hard news story or sports, or I got to interview Bob Costas on a red carpet recently. And I just said, Bob, I mean, this is like gold for me to meet you because I've seen so many of your interviews. Jim Gray, the same thing. Jim's been on 2 or 3 times, one of my best friends. And just watching their style, I've learned so much. And then one last person we're about to have on the podcast is the great Jim Hill, who's celebrating 50 years broadcasting in LA. I mean, that's crazy, right? Um,
Just
yeah,
there's a lot of stories there to make sure you avoid
yeah.
putting on the air with Mr. Hill,
I,
correct?
I think Jim's going to send me a laundry list of those. Yes, but
Well,
the thing with Jim is we have so much shared history. First of all, he's been a great supporter of mine for the books I've done, for the podcast, but so much history going back to Showtime and the Dodgers and Shaq and Kobe, and then of course Kobe by himself, and Kobe loved Jim, um,
yeah.
and and vice versa. So it's going to be a pleasure to actually have a conversation with it. It'll be fun. It'll be interesting. You never know what you're going to get with Jim, but I'm looking forward to that.
And as we wrap up here, how do our students access the episodes as we speak here today? What's the, I guess, traditional business plug, if you will?
Well, you got to follow us. The only way that you're going to really see what we're doing or hear what we're doing is to follow the podcast. So YouTube, it's just called Legends of Sport. That's our channel on YouTube. Um, on our social media on Instagram, it's at Legends of Sport. Also, my photography on Instagram is at ABB Photo Inc. My initials at ABB Photo Inc. And then the audio version of the podcast, because we release, as Chick used to say, a simulcast, we release on audio and video every week. So our main audio platform is iHeart, but you can get our podcast on every podcast platform, um, Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts. So those are the primary places to find us. We're working on a new version of our website, so stay tuned for that. Maybe next time we talk, that'll be launched. We had to revamp that whole thing to make it more current. And in terms of books, if you haven't, your follower or your listeners or your students haven't seen the Mamba Mentality book that Kobe and I did, please check that out. And also the new book that's called Mamba and Mambacita Forever, which just came out in November. The beautiful tribute to Kobe and Gigi through the art of murals all over the world, handpicked by Vanessa Bryant. And it's a really beautiful book.
Well, Andy, I certainly appreciate the time, the energy, the effort, and kudos to you on someone who carved out a Hall of Fame career in one industry, and certainly did not rest on your laurels there, trying something new. Although I guess if Norm hadn't waved you over on a given day, maybe this burgeoning empire in the podcasting world never would have came to be. So I guess
Yeah.
Norm, if wherever you are up
Yeah.
above, listening and watching. Um, you get make sure he gets his roses as well, his flowers.
Oh, for sure. Look, I love Norm. Norm and Mary both passed away the same year, about 3 years ago or so. Miss them every single day. I mean, just wonderful, wonderful people, generous, kind. Norm was truly one of a kind, and no wonder he was so successful, and helped so many people in the business. Just an incredible role model and mentor.
And if nothing else from this conversation, one conversation, what, 11, 12 years ago that took 30 seconds. And maybe you could have walked back to your seat and said, okay, he's crazy, or I don't even know what he's talking about.
That's
Let me
right.
get back to
Yeah.
shooting this, Lakers Trailblazers game. But no, you saw it through, you followed up, and here you are, a dozen years later, and you have a whole new, different world in a way. So definitely commend you there.
Thank you, Jeff. And the last thing I want to add to that, which is wonderful, is that it really is about relationships. I mean, if I didn't have a relationship with Norm, a professional, which turned into a personal relationship as well, but if I wasn't a person of integrity or somebody that he wanted to help, If I was the other side of the coin, um, he never would have reached out to me and tried to, you know, help me and mentor me. So it's all about just being your genuine self, um, never making it about you ever. You worked around me my whole career almost, right, Jeff? I mean, around major athletes, major events. I tried to never make it about me, try to be discreet, get in, get out. Um, I built my career on that, and I continue that now in this realm. So appreciate you saying that. But I think it's important for everyone to understand that it really begins with you being your true self, your genuine self, and that will radiate and attract others to you, right? So that's a very important thing to remember.
Thanks again, Andy. And again, for the students watching this, we appreciate your time, energy as well. And until we see each other again, enjoy the rest of the day.
Thanks, Jeff. Good seeing you, bub.